we're live. Bill, how's it going today?
It's going all right. How about you, Sean?
You always bring the energy up when we start these podcasts.
Always
That's what
so
I appreciate
lively.
about you.
That's
why
what
I
I'm
go to
here
you
for.
first. Katie, I'm going to
Sean?
say the hello to you this time because you thought I didn't last time.
I don't even remember, but hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. It's a lovely Thursday when we're recording this. So we're here today to talk about a really interesting topic. We're here today to talk about the soft skills and the value they can bring to an organization. And this is something that's almost contrasting at times to what we think about traditional comp. A lot of that is hard data, the numbers, spreadsheets, but there's a lot of value. One of the things we talk about in becoming a comp strategist is being a strategic ally to the business. And the more you develop your soft skills, the more I would expect that you can be engaged in those conversations and those discussions in the different ways of thinking about the value that compensation provides and communicating it, getting people to understand it. So we're here to talk about that today. And the great part is we have another special guest.
An expert?
Yeah, I think we have an expert.
Yes.
Makes it sound way more official. We're joined today by Uch Advaryu. Uch is a professor at the University of Michigan, and he is an expert and has done studies on soft skills. Uch, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
So you've done a bunch of research around this, a bunch of studies on soft skills that I want to dive into, but let me just first ask, I gave my very mediocre probably difference between hard skills and soft skills there. How do you view the difference between the two?
Yeah, it's a good question. Soft skills are often sort of murky to define. And so we kind of think about soft skills as everything that's sort of non-technical, right? So everything that doesn't directly pertain to the technical aspects of any particular job. And so you're going to have, a definition by exclusion there. And so if you look at some academic definitions of soft skills that revolve around this, you'll see long lists of different things that span skills, personality traits, just features of a person. So it is quite a difficult thing to summarize. But I would say soft skills are all the skills that are necessary components of successful, job performance that are not directly related to the technical aspects of the job. So, some good examples that I think apply across different workplace contexts are, communication, both horizontally across team members, as well as vertically, between teams and their managers. The ability to be conscientious and focused, the ability to integrate technology into one's work. And there's, a whole kind of host of characteristics around leadership and the ability to kind of lead teams from the start to the end of a goal or a project. So I think those are some of the ones that I think come to mind as very key in most environments. And then, of course, the types of skills you need obviously differ based on the job.
Sure. So it might be how we talk about managerial skills, creativity skills, communication skills, kind of in maybe more day-to-day terms. Is that's how we think about it, maybe?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So these are really just, all the people skills as well as the sort of, basic skills around regulating your own, workflow and personality, managing your emotions, managing your time, managing your ability to learn, and there's been a lot of research recently around things like grit, and the place that grit plays in workplace performance. So it's really extremely broad. But I think the basic idea is quite simple. It's just what else do you need besides understanding how to program properly or understanding how to stitch garments properly or whatever the technical feature of your job is. How do you succeed in the workplace beyond just knowing those skills?
This is Bill here, and there are a few I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead now, but in your research that I just want to reiterate, sort of jumped out at me in a good way. And I think our audience would, not normally think of these things as soft skills, but things like financial literacy and legal literacy and execution excellence. And I think you did actually just say time management. And those are all things that I think help everybody become a better employee or a better performer. And I think that's what your study showed too, or your research shows.
Sometimes these skills are not exactly related to the tasks at hand, but they end up coming in very handy. So, I think you highlighted something that has potential importance in a bunch of different environments, legal literacy. So there, how comfortable do we feel reading, legal jargon? How comfortable do we feel operating within the bounds of the law within our regular workplace environment? I think that often we find that we come up against these small barriers that might slow us down. I find this happens to me when I have to figure out how much to pay in my taxes every year. I have to figure out which form to fill out and all the different ways I could fill this out incorrectly. So having a little bit of that literacy in that respect helps a lot. And I think that's true in the workplace as well.
If I find that I'm always in the gray area of those things, operating within the bounds of legality, is that a me thing or is that a system thing?
Might be both.
So what Bill was referencing is the study that you completed. I believe it was published, I should say, last year, The Skills to Pay the Bills, published in the National Bureau of Economic Research. Can you tell us about this study, just kind of the general setup of it, what you were looking to find, the basics of it?
Sure, and I should just correct the publication. So that was actually published in the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research's working paper series, which kind of publishes papers, to circulate them amongst econ audiences, and then the papers are also eventually published in academic journals. So you'll often see that NBER working paper version and then a published version in a journal. So we're engaging that publication process right now. But I'll tell you a bit about the paper. So this was kind of an interesting setting to think about soft skills in some sense. This was in the setting of garment production in India. So not a place where you think, hey, communication and leadership and all that might be incredibly important, but it turns out our results showed that there was quite a lot that soft skills could do, even in that sort of environment where technical skills, are what comes at the maximum premium. So I'll tell you a little bit about the study. So what we did was we partnered with the largest producer of ready-made garments in India, as well as a large brand that does a lot of business with companies, suppliers from around the world, Gap, to evaluate a program for female garment workers that's centered around the provision of soft skills. So we thought this was an interesting environment to test the importance of soft skills for a couple of reasons. First, in many low-income environments, this is the case, but we think it's particularly true for women in a place like India who are coming from low-income backgrounds. It's been shown in academic work, we often learn the majority of our soft skills in very early on, in our early years, say from 0 to 5, things like preschool, kindergarten. That's when we really learn things like how do we, participate as a functioning member of a team? How do we communicate with our peers? How do we wait patiently for something? How do we, bring up problems that we're having with our parents and our teachers? All of those things, are just things that, most of us learn every day in, preschool or in kindergarten or at home while we're interacting with our families. But when you don't have access to high quality preschool, when you don't have access to good kindergartens or elementary schools, as is the case in many low income environments, then you might imagine that some of those skills don't develop as well as they could. And so when you get to a workplace setting, and for many of the women that were involved in this project, this is actually the first time that they were in a workplace, in a formal workplace environment where they worked, 8 to 5 and had to keep regular hours, had a boss, etc. And so, for many of these women, we think the stocks of the skill in terms of this dimension of soft skill were pretty low. And so we thought improving things like communication or conscientiousness on the job and other, key skills might actually have quite a large impact in this particular population. So we worked with our two firm corporate partners to evaluate this soft skills program that had been designed partly by folks at Gap and partly by a whole host of different actors on the ground in India. And we evaluated the program in the most rigorous way possible via a randomized control trial. So this is something that a tool that I use a lot in my research, which actually, originated in the medical literature. So think of, a drug trial where you have, a drug that you want to test the efficacy of, and you want to compare it to a control group. And so the way that these trials are done is that individuals are randomized into either getting the treatment or a control or placebo. So the same way that those drug trials work, we sort of ported that method into the workplace setting and ran an experiment in the workplace where we basically randomized access to the program for female garment workers. We did this across a large swath of workers, so we had something like 3,000 workers take part in the experiment. And out of those, about 1,000 or so received the program. And so we basically tracked the outcomes of these women as they went through the program, and then we actually followed them for about just shy of a year after the program ended, and we assessed not only sort of what they learned and what sort of skills they gained in terms of soft skills, as well as some of the other things the program taught, but we also then tracked what happened to their workplace outcomes, including, crucially, their productivity, because this is something that we care about a lot in terms of assessing the gains to such programs in the workplace, right? We know sort of as a matter of common sense that if you have improved communication in your team members, that your team's going to function better. But the question is sort of how much better? Is it something that the firm's upper management can look at and say, this is a worthwhile training program, I want to invest in this and have some outlays on behalf of my employees because I know that I'm going to get the gain from that in terms of improved soft skills. So we want to quantify to the extent to which we actually saw those gains in the workplace. It's not also, just as before I tell you about the results, it wasn't obvious for a variety of reasons whether this thing was going to work. One, because training programs are often very messy. You never know what you're really getting, right, from training your employees. It depends on how much they show up, how much they're engaged, how good the trainers are, how good the material is, all that stuff. So first of all, we weren't sure if we were going to see movement in the actual skills that, soft skills that these women possessed and actualized in the workplace. And then beyond that, even if those skills, were actually inculcated via the program, we weren't sure whether we would actually see those things translate into actual improvements in workplace outcomes. So it's possible that, I learned how to communicate better, but it actually doesn't move the needle on whatever measure of productivity I'm using. Then beyond that, I think there was an interesting question around, well, let's suppose that all those things were satisfied and, we saw that improved communication and other skills translated into productivity improvements for these garment workers. Well, then did that actually change their wages? Did the firm recognize the increased performance and generate greater wages as a result? Or did it generate turnover? Meaning, did these women find better jobs somewhere else now that they were more productive and higher skilled? And that also tells us something about the returns to the program for any particular firm, because if we think the labor market's very fluid, if I don't pay my workers more once they're more skilled, they may just leave and go someplace where they can earn a higher wage. So those were the kind of open questions that we tackled. I'll tell you a bit about the results. So
can I ask you a question though? I do want to get to the results because actually I'd love to hear more about that. I just want to pause first for a moment. So the women that participate in these programs, it was 2 hours a week over a course of 10 weeks where they were learning, probably I'm guessing a different focus each hour, each week. Is that what they were doing?
That's right. So there were a few sort of key parts to the program, but the structure was basically 2 hours a week. So they came in early for an hour. One day of the week they came in an hour early, or some of the programs that we ran actually the women left an hour late. And then they borrowed an hour from the workplace. So the employer kind of bought into this by basically saying, okay, you know what, you can leave your production line an hour early, or you can come in an hour late, and then you take this program. And so it's kind of equal contribution from the worker and the firm in terms of time. And then basically the kind of structure of the curriculum was that the training was divided into different modules, and each module basically featured an emphasis. And so you might 1 week be learning about conscientiousness in the workplace. Another week you might be learning about time management. Another week you might be learning about something like legal literacy, etc. And so there were a bunch of sort of key modules. And then I think Bill might have mentioned this, but there was a nice sort of summary kind of set of trainings at the end that basically said, hey, you've been involved in this program for something like 9 months now, or every week you've been coming in and learning different things. How do we actually sort of put it all together? And this kind of module was termed execution excellence. There was basically, understanding the fundamental takeaways from each of the different modules that were learned throughout the program. So it was in all quite an extensive undertaking. So in terms of the timing, these women were coming in I think a total of about 80 hours over the course of something like 10 months. And then there was a bunch of modules around, summarizing and kind of giving the women takeaways that were added on to that. So it was quite an extensive program for the women, as well as an extensive undertaking for the employer to basically buy into that for such a long period of time.
My error then, it was 10 months, not 10 weeks. Sorry about that. I was having trouble with the math earlier, and that makes more sense now that it was 80 hours. I would guess that this kind of a setup would be an easier, maybe, type of industry to measure productivity in. So let's jump into that. How did you set that up?
That's right. So that one of the draws in terms of doing this in the garment sector was because we could actually measure productivity really, really well. And so this is something we care about, obviously, from the academic perspective, but also I think from the perspective of understanding takeaways about the impacts of soft skills training. Often, something like turnover or wages, those can be measured fairly easy in a lot of kind of firm administrative data sets. But actually creating individualized productivity measures is very, very hard. Turns out, I won't bore you with the details, but it's hard in the garment sector as well, but we worked, very diligently to overcome that. We ended up recording for every woman that was involved in the trial. We know how much she's producing in terms of the operations that she's doing on her machine for every hour of every day that she's working. So we have really, really granular measures of productivity, and that's ultimately what really sort of helps set our work apart in terms of what we are able to contribute. We can actually document in a number what happened to productivity as a result of the program.
So that makes sense then. So you're looking at, because one of my initial thoughts was, as we're looking at it in this type of a setting, was the whole, for example, manufacturing line getting educated, because you said it was 1,000 random did they all form together in a line, but they were manufacturing things literally on their own, them and a sewing machine, for example.
Well, no. So yeah, this is actually set up as a production line. So you're right. The line is making garments, and each person on the line is kind of in charge of a particular operation. So if you're making a button-down shirt, someone's got to put the collar on, someone has to attach the sleeve, someone's got to attach the buttons, someone's attaching the placket, and et cetera. So there's a whole bunch of different steps involved. So the idea is, our trial kind of sampled a subset of workers from these production lines for treatment. So not the whole line was treated, only sort of a set number of individuals within a line.
Treated meaning part of the experiment.
Exactly. That's right.
So, okay, let's jump to that. What did you see as a result of this program?
So, interestingly, we see fairly dramatic productivity improvements as a result of the program. So, if you compare about 8 or 9 months after the program ended, if you compare the productivity of women who took part in the program as part of the experimental treatment group and women who were not part of the program in the control group, the women who were treated, who received the program, were about 20% more productive than the controls. And the interesting kind of feature of those dynamics is that you only start to see those increases in productivity basically towards the last couple months of the program. And we don't really have a reason for why that is nailed down, but in talking to workers and in talking to the folks at the firm who ran the program, it seems that part of that is related to the idea that soft skills often take a long time to develop. And so it was really important that this program was spread out over a 9 or 10 month period. So it took a while for the women to sort of come out of their shells, start participating in the workshops to the fullest capacity, start inculcating all the skills, and then kind of putting them together and applying them to their workplace kind of competencies. So it took quite some time, but we do see these improvements starting to ramp up substantially in the last few months of the program. And then interestingly, because we tracked workers after the program ended, we basically see productivity sustaining increases for the treatment group up till about 8 or 9 months out, which is when we stopped tracking the workers. So we, I think that emphasized to us, one, the idea that it does take a long time to inculcate these skills, at least in this particular setting. And two, that it's really important to track the workers afterward. If you hadn't included that sort of post-program period, you would have missed out on the sort of bulk of the impact. So that's the sort of impact on productivity. Interestingly, in terms of turnover and the kind of idea that we discussed earlier around what happens to the workers after they're more skilled, we find no differential turnover after the program period. So basically, women who took part in the program, even though they're more skilled and more productive, are no more likely to leave the firm. And that's despite the fact that wages actually rise very modestly with treatment. Okay, so basically wages for these workers who are more skilled are not going up all that much. We can measure the increase. It's between 0.5% and 1%. So it's pretty small. So the idea is, the firm is able to gain quite a lot out of this exercise because women are, much more productive as a result of the treatment. And they're not turning over at a higher rate, and they're also not getting paid substantially more. And so when you look at the rate of return, unsurprisingly, you find a very large rate of return. So the net return 8 months after the program was finished was around 250 to 260%. So that's, as I would put that up against any sort of, high-powered workplace incentive program that I know about.
So this question could launch us into probably an entire other podcast. But as an economist, I'm curious just to get your take. is this one of those? Is this potentially a reason why we see wages rising, at a normal 3% pace typically in the U.S., but remaining flat when calculated towards inflation, but productivity rising? Is this one of the reasons we might see that? Is this related to it? Like employers are going to benefit a lot more, but that doesn't necessarily pass on.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm not sure how. I think there are a lot of explanations for the stagnation of wage growth in the U.S. And I haven't seen, to my knowledge, a lot of that discussion around soft skills applied to that particular question. So that's, I think, an interesting proposition, but I don't have great evidence to come to bear on that. What I will say is what I think this reflects in this setting, and I think this is common in many settings, including in the U.S., is that this is pretty clear evidence of labor market imperfections, as economists call them. So this is basically the idea that when you're hiring someone, it's often the case that depending on the type of position, soft skills are de-emphasized or sort of overlooked very easily, right? So particularly when you think about something like a blue collar worker, like the types of workers that were involved in this experiment, employers are not evaluating holistically sort of what these individuals can bring to the table in terms of communication skills, patience, decision making, leadership, etc. What they're really looking at is, how well can you do the technical aspects of the job, right? And I'm going to sort of grade you based on that, and then I'm going to assign, a wage band and give you an offer. That's kind of what's done in this garment setting. It's what's done in a lot of different blue collar settings. Even if you go to the sort of white collar world, if you look at managers, for example, there's a lot of different work showing that the hiring of managers is extremely kind of inefficient in the sense that a lot of information is left on the table. Because how much can you really tell about how good a manager's soft skills are by looking at his resume and having maybe one phone conversation and a 1 hour in-person interview, right? I think you're leaving behind a lot of information on what skills are available to you if you hired that manager. So I think this indicates something about the lack of soft skills factoring into wages properly across the labor market. And so, this is a good example of that basically, it stands to reason that if I just got trained in these skills, I might be a great communicator and I might really be an asset to my team, but it's hard to convey that and hard to monetize that if I go to another potential employer.
So when you were laying the groundwork, the foundation for your research, how did you determine which soft skills were most important?
That's a great question. So for this particular paper project, we basically teamed up with Gap, who had this soft skills program as one of their major social responsibility, sustainability type activities. And so here we took the whole program as a package. I think it included lots of great things. It also included things that perhaps were not super relevant to soft skills in the workplace. I think if you look at the paper, you'll see something like water, sanitation, and hygiene. I think that's a really, really important part of an overall package of skills training, maybe not so related to soft skills. But it was part of the program, and so we evaluated the whole thing as a package. Subsequently, we've done a lot of additional work on soft skills, including focusing on training for managers. And we ran a similar trial in India where we looked at designing a program from scratch. And for that exercise, we actually went and measured the soft skills of managers, from scratch using basically the latest in measurement of of soft skills, personality traits, and features, et cetera, from the academic literature. So there we were basically able to say, where are the gaps in skills for a particular managerial population? And then design a program that addresses those gaps specifically. So there we can get much more specific. And in a program like that, you might imagine that you can also customize really well, because every potential firm is going to have a different set of skills that's kind of necessary, and a different set of managers. Then we can identify gaps in those skills in different ways, and then design programs that don't give you a bunch of extraneous stuff, but really just focus in on what your managers really need.
So is that how you think this might translate best back to the HR compensation people listening today, which is that it's probably unwise to assume that everybody's been taught soft skills, broadly speaking, or even might have be well versed in it, if you will. Is it that they should do an assessment like that? Or maybe I'll ask it this way: what are some signs that this should be a focus area for your organization, and how would you get started on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in some sense this disease, if you will, is sort of insidious in the sense that it's often hard to tell what the counterfactual may be. If I had sort of managers with better soft skills, maybe I would have sort of less workplace tensions, or maybe I would have less incidences of conflict. But those are kind of very rough indicators, right? What's more likely is, if I increase certain soft skills, I'm going to be increasing the sort of communication and the workflow and the time and other types of management of my teams, and that's going to generate greater productivity. It's hard to see that just from looking at a snapshot of your workplace. So essentially what we've done in academic research, and we're subsequently rolling out a product as well to help firms actually diagnose these problems, is essentially at either the time of hiring or for your current managerial population, we've developed a battery of tests that end up being, of some of the skills that end up being very, very important for productivity. When we administer this battery of tests, we can kind of see where the skill gaps are. And then for each kind of set of skills, if there's a gap that's identified, we can then basically go in and supplement those skills via training. So the kind of, as you rightly were indicating, the first step in this is diagnosis. We don't want to sort of come at everything, with a hammer. If we can kind of come in with a scalpel instead and say, your managerial population is actually pretty good at skills X, Y, and Z. Now let's focus on A, B, and C.
So for example, if Bill's threatening to fight me in the hallway on a regular basis,
happens a lot.
It does. Enough that I'm speaking out about it here. Our HR team might want to have our team take your assessment, and then you could match that with where we're strong and where we might not want to argue and fight as much, Bill.
That's right.
Such a bully, Bill.
If we want to go full out shameless plug here, do you have a name for that assessment or that product that you're working on?
Yeah, so we're this is all part of a grows out of my nonprofit called the Good Business Lab, which is based in India, and we've also got operations here in the U.S. and just set up an office in Latin America, in Colombia. And so, we'd love for folks to check out our website, goodbusinesslab.org, and learn more about all the various types of soft skills work we're doing. I think this applies both to, diagnosis as well as treatment, so to speak. So we're designing the diagnostic tools as well as the subsequent trainings that managers can take to improve their soft skills.
That's great. I want to go back to the actual study. So I think you said there were 1,000 women in it and 2,000 that were not. Did any of those 2,000 women ask to be given that training after the fact? And did the original 1,000, were they happy? Were they, is perhaps one of the reasons they stayed because they felt like they were more valued
Sure.
by
Yeah.
being put
Yeah.
in the
Their
program.
employer was investing in them.
Right. And they
That's
felt good about the place.
So right, so the way we structured this particular experiment was to use what we call an oversubscription design. So basically, what we did was we went around to the factories that were going to be involved in the study, and we said we're coming in with this interesting new program. We described the program a little bit and said we are not sure how many slots we're going to have, but we encourage everybody who is interested to sort of sign up for a lottery. And so we essentially, had about 3,000 women sign up for that lottery. And then, so everybody within that sample, within our sort of experimental sample, was part of that lottery and was kind of interested a priori in the program. Then we basically randomized within that 3,000 women and said, okay, we've got about 1,000 folks that can actually get access to the program because of the kind of constraints around logistics that we need in terms of running the program and the size of the cohorts and that sort of thing. And so the fairest way to do this is to allocate at random. So we're just going to draw names out of a hat, basically.
Right.
And that's how we sort of came up with the 1,000 women. That also allows us to estimate the actual effects of the program in the most rigorous way possible. But it's great as a communication tool as well, because we said, hey, there's lots of interest in this program, and we don't want to sort of be preferential in the way that we are deciding who gets access and who doesn't. And so we sort of just drew random lots. Afterward, actually, there was quite a lot of interest, and the factories that got the program have then gone on to implement the program for the rest of the population of workers within the factory. So there was a lot of buy-in after the program was over, particularly after we went back and presented the productivity results to management. As you can imagine, they were
I would imagine, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of buy-in from the firm. I would say in terms of this idea that, part of the effect that we see may be due to reciprocity, or the idea that, you give back, you exert more effort while you're at work because the workplace, the employer is investing in you, is
Sure.
certainly potentially part of the effect. So we did something called a mediation analysis as part of the paper. And basically what this does is kind of a fancy statistical technique to tell you how much of your effects, for example, on productivity, are due to various factors. And basically what we found was that about 50% of our treatment effects on productivity are due directly to the soft skills that these women are learning. So, when things like your problem-solving ability, your decision-making ability, your time management, your emotional and stress management, your communication, etc., when these things improve, those things actually generate about half of the productivity effect that we see. But the other half is actually explained, by a host of other factors, including the idea that there's a certain amount of reciprocity.
So that's fascinating. So is that relate to, I think we were talking about this before we started recording today, that first half that you were talking about there, the direct effect, is that because somebody doesn't have those hurdles in their way necessarily during the day? So the example you gave was something as simple as like filling out a tax form. But the example here could be because they can better negotiate complex scenarios of human interactions, for example. They just kind of move on with their day when those things happen. They can negotiate it more easily. They're on to the next thing. Productivity rises. Is that the way to think about that first part of it?
Yeah, so that's part of the way that that's part of the effect that we're seeing for sure. So let me give you a good example with communication. So at baseline, communication in this particular workplace setting is pretty bad. So workers are, it's a very noisy environment. First of all, workers are sort of separated by these large sewing machines. There's a manager who's usually a man. I think 95% of the managers in our setting were men, and he's he's stressed and he's got to make his targets. And so he's taken some of that stress out on his workers, who are usually women. And so there's a gender dynamic involved here. And the women, often are very loath to particularly report problems to their supervisor. So they, at baseline, are not raising their hands and saying, hey, my needle is broken, or a part of my machine is down, or hey, can we speed up my throughput because I'm done with my batch of clothes, but I'm waiting on the next one and it's slowing me down. These really simple things, if they don't get communicated in time, they can lead to bottlenecks. So one really fundamental way that the program improved productivity was just by improving these little hurdles to communication, as you put it. So now I'm sort of much less averse to raising my hand and saying, look, I have this small problem here you got to fix, and pointing it out to my supervisor. Or I'm a little bit less averse to turning to the person who is feeding me parts of clothes and basically saying, hey, can we get someone to help you or speed things up because it's slowing me down, right? So these very simple things, or, I'm feeling a little sick today, I might need a little help, or I need to use the restroom, or whatever it is. Just small amounts of communication go a long way when you're working together on a production line.
So thank you very much for your time today. This was fascinating, and we could keep talking more about it. I do have one last question for you, though, before we let you go on with your day. As a teacher at the University of Michigan, I have to know, what's your go-to order at Zingerman's?
I love the number 38. You guys should check it out. It's a veggie sandwich with cream cheese and sprouts. It's nice and fresh. It's fantastic.
That actually sounds quite fantastic. Next time I'm in the area.
Unconventional, but I think you'll like it.
All right. Well, appreciate your time today. I think our audience is going to find this extremely useful. It's one of those things that I feel like people literally feel that a lot, feel like there might be a gap there in terms of soft skills. And this could provide a really great way to true that up, to really see what those gaps are and how to fix them in the organization.
And how to work them into your interview, recruitment, and performance management processes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's right. I think that last piece is really crucial. It's something that we're working on in recent academic work, and something that could really, I think in terms of the types of issues that you mentioned PayFactors works on, it's a really, really crucial piece there. Sort of how do you not only find the right talent for a particular position, including not just the hard skills that are involved, but the soft skills that are necessary for success in that position. And then how do you, pay that person, specifically that person with that set of skills, the right amount. So a really fascinating set of questions.
Yeah, it is. And if you can solve that, there's probably a lot of money in that for you, by the way. So thanks for your time today. Thanks for sharing with us your experience and expertise. We greatly appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on, and appreciate the conversation.